it going, everybody? This is Daily Downloads. My name is Chad. With me is Eric. This is the second part of our Saw trilogy of shows. And previously we reviewed Spiral. Today we are going to be talking about our favorite and least favorite traps / deaths in the Saw franchise. And by my calculations, if you count the newest movie, I think there's about 86 deaths in the Saw franchise. I might be, give or take one there. I was trying to mentally, I know there was 81 as of 2017. I was trying to mentally count the deaths in this last movie. I think there were 5. So
maybe like every 15 minutes or so. I feel like in Spiral there were some like long periods where I'm like, aren't we supposed to get like another death soon? Like
it's weird when you're thinking about that. Like, when's the next death coming?
I mean, typically, I don't know. I feel like it's usually like clockwork, but
So yeah, we are going to talk about some of the more creative traps that we've seen in the franchise, and maybe some that we didn't like. So, Eric, I'll let you start. Was there any that first came to mind when you started thinking about this topic?
Yes. I gonna take a pretty obvious one. Just to start it off with the kind of simple, basic answer, and that is, I feel like the most classic of the bear trap face contraption, which is what I think of. That was like on the poster or a version of the poster for the original Saw movie, if memory serves me correct, or some version of the poster from the first film, which is also stood out because it was one of the, at the time, or maybe the very first trap that the person survived. And just that idea of this, I feel like it encapsulates the whole Saw sort of mystique, where you have the bear trap, reverse bear trap on your head. The key was for the character of Amanda. The key was in the stomach of this other guy who was like paralyzed or something. He was still alive, and she had to kill him to rip the key out from his guts and unlock the trap before I think the timer was at 60 seconds or so. And I like that one because it's simple. And I think the best traps are also the ones where you can see the visual of it. You can see the visual before it actually happens. And that's the one where you really kind of like grit your teeth. And yeah, that's, for me, probably the most one I associate the most with the franchise.
Right. No, that's a good one. And I agree with you when it comes to the simpler they are, the better. They would try to get more inventive as the series went along. And it almost became like a horror version of Rube Goldberg machines, because it was always about a group of people. And the one that I like, I don't know, like is the right word, I guess. But the one that comes to mind the most is from Saw 3, and that is the rack. That also happens to be Jigsaw's favorite. And
oh yeah,
the rack is where the guy all of his limbs are kind of tied down, not tied down, but chained or locked down, and they all rotate, even his head. And so the guy in that movie is trying to come to grips with the fact that his son had died and gotten hit by a car, and the guy that's in the rack is the person who's driving the car. And so the guy needs to kind of sacrifice a little bit of himself in order to get this gentleman free from the rack. And obviously that doesn't happen, but just the visual of that, and just thinking about that with all your limbs being twisted in different directions like that, is like just brutal. I mean, it's just, to me, and that's a very simple design in reality. Like, it's just twisting your limbs, but I'm sure all of us have gotten a burn on our hands if you twist your arms. I'm not going to refer to it as what it was referred to in my youth, but everybody knows what I'm talking about. It sucks. So, or you've gotten broken limbs or whatever. So yeah, that's one that first came to mind for me. I ended up, when I revisited these films, Eric, I jotted down more than I thought, but But yeah, that's one that I liked the most.
I think that, and also what's interesting about Saw 3 is that the it's the guy who's going through all this, literally like going through this maze of traps, if you will. He's not the one who's necessarily in danger. Like you said,
Right.
it's about being the better man
Right.
and all of it, you know. So for those, some of those stood out less to me, I guess, because I don't associate it with um it's just about him being the better man, but he's not going through these traps himself. He's trying to save these other people who have done him wrong.
Right. And like he kind of gets hurt in a few ways in order to get these people in order to forgive these people, but he's not in nearly as much danger as the person in the trap is. So
Yeah, that's why I think also with some of those traps from that film, it's like, well, how do you escape them? But I don't think the people in the traps necessarily can, right? It relies on him to do something,
true, yeah.
right? The woman
Right.
who gets frozen to death, like,
That was another one I had jotted down.
yeah,
The like just getting sprayed with the cold water, like, oh my goodness. Like, I mean, just like, and that's a simple thing too. Like, she's just hanging there and he has to decide to free her before she freezes to death. And I mean, it's just, it's bad. And unless you are a member of the polar bear club, that looks like an awful way to die to me.
yeah. That one stands out to me just because I always remember those sort of scenes in movies where, yeah, frozen limb or frozen, because then every movie has to deliver on this, except for The Shining. They freeze them, but they don't crack them.
Yeah, yeah.
But other than that movie, I remember Jason X freezes the girl's head and then crashes it because it's all frozen. I feel like if the person gets frozen, they gotta crash, and all the ice in their body has to. I feel like you gotta deliver on that, right?
You have to do that
You
visual,
have to.
absolutely.
You
Yeah.
can't freeze someone and then not give us the crash and the results. So, yeah.
So what's another one that comes to mind for you, Eric?
Then another one that I liked is because when I was trying to think of like how best to describe these traps in general, I'm like, well, it feels like a lot of them are rooted in. I'm just kind of making this up, but hopefully I'm somewhat right. Like a 16th century torture. I don't know why I'm saying 16th century specifically, but of a different era, a different century, where these torture kind of techniques. And so I like those ones that feel like they're kind of rooted in a history, and this one is rooted in its most obvious inspiration, and that is the Saw 5, the pendulum. Um,
Oh yeah.
which is the Edgar Allan Poe thing, obviously, and it doesn't really, and it's so simple. It's that like sharp accent going back and forth while the guy's lying on the table, and it's getting closer and closer to his body, and we know exactly what that is. We know what that's a reference to. I just kind of like that for the simplicity of it. Like we said, sometimes the simpler is better, and you know exactly what he has to do and exactly what will happen to him if he does not. So I admire that one for just being. I think that may even be the one that opens Saw 5.
Yeah.
It is, right?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that one I appreciate as well. I like
You
that one.
remember what he had to do to get out of it? So yeah, in Saw 5, in order to escape the pendulum, he has to have his hands crushed by two presses. Like,
So like slip it out of like the handcuffs.
he has to acknowledge his hands being crushed. Like,
Oh,
in order to get out of the pendulum trap, he has to allow his hands to be crushed.
well, I mean that's not. I mean, look, I wouldn't want that to happen to me. But if my other option was death, I
Right.
guess I'd go. I guess I'd go with the hand crush. I guess I would.
Right. Well, you know what? Okay, that brings me to a tangent. So we had talked in our Spiral review about some of the traps in that movie. And, you know, you were just talking about giving the option between crushed hands and death, what you would choose. There's one in particular in Spiral that is among, to me, the most brutal traps. Now, in terms of visual quality, it doesn't really offer a lot, but like,
Yeah.
it's probably the most brutal one I've seen, which is the woman is tied down and she has a faucet above her, and out of that faucet comes scalding hot wax, and the only way to escape it is by severing her spine from a
Yes.
blade that's under her neck. And I don't know what I would like choose, like, because to me, being a little bit claustrophobic, the idea of scalding hot wax suffocating me to death sounds incredibly awful.
Yeah.
But
And
then again,
like,
I don't want to sever my spine voluntarily either. I don't know if
yeah, there's certain those kind of things. Everybody, I feel like, has their own like triggers for that kind of stuff. Even just like hearing that, like sever yourself, like, oh god,
right, yeah.
can't even think about that. And in her case, she's lying down on a table. So as the what was it, sulfur? Is it acid or what was pouring on her face?
Scalding hot wax.
Hot wax. So like then when that's getting in her face, she's obviously retracting, and then but that's right where the sharp thing is.
Right,
So it's like, okay, shit, well, it's gonna make a decision for you if you don't.
right.
Um, but yeah, that one was also interesting too because I didn't really pick up at the time that because they put that is it a cloth thing over her face or the
Oh
whatever
yeah, she does have
something over her face
some
then
sort of mat or piece of tarp or something over her face. Yeah,
yeah.
plastic, whatever it is.
And then I just thought back to because like these films have also been associated with like being born of uh the war in Iraq kind of era, right? And like those videos of Abu Ghraib and stuff. And so I thought of like waterboarding, like
Right,
when they're putting that on her face, and she's getting a lot worse than water, waterboarding tactics. But that definitely stood out for me for that reason. I thought you were going to mention when you said the crushed hands. I thought you were going to mention the guy who gets his like fingers ripped out, pulled.
oh yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, that's a yeah. The crushed hands was in Saw 5, but yeah, the finger. Oh man, yeah, the finger one. There was some really diabolical ones in Spiral. There really, really was. From a visual point of view, the like the bottle crusher that then sprays glass on the guy hanging, like
yeah,
is like is
I mean,
creative in a sense of like is there a machine that does that? Why does it do that? It's like
and also like I think that is a great example of one where I was like, okay, this. And I'm starting to think of like velocity, and I became a physicist, physicist. While I was watching the movie, I'm like, would that impact make that much of a dent? Would it be because there are times where it misses his body and goes right into the wall, and it's like, and I'm like,
right.
these glass bottles, like, I don't know, like, would this really happen? Like, it doesn't really make sense. And would you die? I mean, I guess you would bleed out eventually, but
It's
yeah,
reminiscent of the pig trough. It-
yeah, that
I
was
forget
one that
I
stood out
forget
to me.
what movie that what installment that's from, but like
That's
and then
three as
eventually
well.
the pigs increase in volume, and like that's just gross. But that's
Yeah,
also from Saw 3.
yeah, that one's actually another one that stood out to me where I feel like, as we mentioned about Spiral, for whatever reason, the whole pig thing keeps coming back.
Right.
Unless I have not well read up on the lore of the franchise, I don't remember the connection to swine. but
I don't
but
either.
they show up in a ton of these movies. Um, it makes sense for Spiral, the whole cop metaphor. But other than that, yeah, it was just that one I remember because of how just gross it is. And I think the guy he drowns in it in pig
No,
guts.
no, he
Nope.
saves that guy.
Okay,
But
but
then
that is like what would happen, right? He would drown in it because he's like chained to the
right,
floor, and
yeah,
the more pigs keep coming.
yeah. So he saves him, but then that guy dies in the next trap inadvertently anyway. So
Well, look, you can only call a cab for someone once. I mean, second time's on them. So
so there's obviously a lot of traps that involve more than one person. Um, there's one in Saw 4 that I thought was creative just from a looking at it on its own point of view, which is the mute and the blind man who are
Oh yeah.
like kind of linked together via this machine in the middle,
Yeah.
and they have to communicate somehow to each other, but they can't. So it ends up being the mute who eventually breaks free of his sewn mouth shut. But
Ah.
and that
See,
character comes back in another installment.
I don't even remember.
Yeah, yeah.
Uh-huh.
But that was a good one. I liked, say what you will about the twist part of it, but in Saw 5, the whole idea of the guy has to get in the coffin full of glass,
Oh yeah.
he thinks is a really bad trap, and so he puts the other guy into it, but that ends up being a way out, and instead this guy like gets crushed by
Yeah.
walls closing in, which is just crazy.
I mean that's a good example too, where I feel like I like the ones where there is a clear way to win, to
Right,
escape. And if they just got as literal as possible,
right.
they would escape. You know, it's like, yeah, if the guy would have gone into that chamber, he would have lived. You
Yeah,
know, but he thought that was a trap, and so he actually got killed by ignoring his logic, by
right,
ignoring his instinct. So I appreciate those. There was another one like that where in Saw 2 where the woman has to get a key to something, and she sees the key in the box with like you put your hands up, and it's like blades on the inside
right.
box, so she's like cutting her wrists, and if she moves her hands down, I didn't know there was gonna be this much acting in this episode, but if she pulls the hands down, she's like cutting her wrists even more, but
Right.
at that point you're kind of bleeding out, and if you would have just noticed the key above the box, I believe you would have been free. And so I think those are clever because there is an easy enough way to beat a riddle, if you
Right.
will.
And there's another one that really isn't a choice. Eventually, that this is a trap that was meant to kill this person, but I still think it's brutal in its execution, which is the woman, the Detective Carey is her name. It's from Saw 3, and she has her rib cage trapped with this machine that will, as we are acting in this episode, Eric, it will open somewhat to a butterfly effect. And or in order to get the key, she has to stick her hand in a vat of acid. And I mean, that's just, but she
So
ended up getting the key, but
your hand
her
is gone, I guess.
her rib cage, like there was no way for her to get out of it. Like that was meant to kill her, so her rib cage, is torn apart anyway.
I mean, I think that is also the thing I like and also really dislike about the franchise is that you also have to imagine that they usually start the trap unconscious, right? They're
Right.
they're unconscious. They wake up and all of a sudden this freaking voice is talking to you and you said you got 60 seconds and time starts now. And I'd be like, whoa, 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 whoa. Can I read the directions? I'm not following. I stick my hand in this, but before you know it, the 60 seconds already started. So
Right.
I find obviously because we got to get the movie along, people adapt and know the rules pretty quickly. I
Right.
I would probably die just because I wouldn't understand what I'm supposed to do, and I need to watch the videotape again. But they don't
Your
seem to
60
ever.
seconds would be up, and you'd be like, okay, so what's happening again? Let me replay the
I'm like, hold on, where am I though first? Can someone at least tell me where I am? Like, what's? I'm not following this. By that point, I'm already gone.
Do
I'm
I
like,
get my
how did
free
we get
phone
this?
call or
How did this puppet ride in on this bicycle? What's
yeah,
happening? I would have no clue. I'm like, why is there a VHS tape in front of me? This is like 2021. What the hell's happening? That's a smart That's a smart TV. This doesn't make any sense. But they always get it so quickly.
yeah,
So that I like that, and I think it's a stupid thing about the franchise that you just the blind and deaf man one. Like, you telling me that in 60 seconds it's all okay, got it.
like how are they going to be able to figure that out? Like the blind man, I should say. Like he has no idea what's going on because he's blind.
Yeah.
So it's like impossible in the amount of time that they have, for both of these guys to live. But
Yeah. I think that was um
there was another funny one, and it was one of the later Saw movies. I think it was 6 or even the final chapter, where you had the girl hanging above the two guys, and they have like she's playing with both of them in terms of like she's seeing both these guys, but neither of them know it. And she has both of these guys set against each other, and so they need to make a choice of whether or not to save their rival or to save the girl hanging above them. So
Yeah.
eventually they just decide fuck her, and they allow her to get like chopped in half by a saw or whatever.
Yeah, I think those are cool. Like I remember there was like a Russian roulette sort of one, which now I'm blanking. I think I almost say saw 5, but it could be 6. Where it's almost like they're in like a circle and like 4 people are dying at once and they have different ways of dying because
In the merry-go-round, you mean the
merry-go-round. Yeah, that one.
that's the one with
Guy from Family Matters. It's incredible that he's in that. For me personally, it's
yeah,
incredible.
it is.
Like,
Because anybody our age, like, you know, even around our age, like, you can't put him in a movie. Like, instantly we just think, oh my God, it's Eddie Winslow. Why did he end up in that trap? Like, you know, is Carl going to show up? Or the dragons, maybe?
Yeah, exactly. The dragons set up this entire trap.
This was their revenge.
His trap takes place in Rachel's place.
This is why I shouldn't have been on the set of that movie, because if I was, I would have been like, can we please at least just put spray paint of the dragons in the background?
Yeah, exactly. Or was it Saw 2, the actress from Seventh Heaven?
Yeah.
Whatever her name was, I don't know. Beverly something.
Yeah, she just died because of the like the gas, the poisonous gas that was being infiltrated into the house.
Yeah.
But
she's another person that stood out to me as like, oh, I feel like you were at that point. She was still somewhat.
She had a distinct face, and you instantly knew, okay, I remember her.
Yeah, exactly.
So, is there any traps that you didn't like at all?
Yes. And for some, it's kind of funny because those are usually the least memorable. So as I was going through a complete list of all of them, I was like, I don't recall this one, but it sounds stupid. And things like that. Because as you're watching it, of course, you know that like the ones that really kind of a waste. And I would say that for one I really didn't like actually was from Spiral. Actually, the opening one, which involves a man having to pull out his tongue before a train comes and hits him, which is how I believe Jigsaw's wife died, or close to that, the train death. And the reason I didn't like that is because it just doesn't make sense that he's suspended in the air and he's got a contraption on his face and he has to and his tongue is like out, like being held out
by
another contraption, and so he needs to almost like kick the chair out from under him, which will yank the tongue out of his mouth before a roaring subway train car comes and kills him. What I don't like about that is I'm not totally understanding how he could survive either way exactly.
Exactly, because in that one, like as you see when he dies, like it's not his tongue getting severed, like it looks like his whole throat structure being pulled out.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what it appeared to be.
Yeah, and usually with the saw traps is that even if you complete the task with 1/10 of a second to go, you did it. But in this, he does complete it, but and also obviously trains, if there's something on the tracks, the train is alert and stops. Like they're not going to just ride into a body. But nonetheless, I'll let that go for this movie. All right, even Pelham 1, 2, 3, they had better transit authorities than this. But yeah, it just didn't make sense that either his entire like almost lower half of his face is going to be ripped out, which you would die, or if that doesn't happen, you're going to be hit by the train and you would die. So I wasn't really following.
I'd rather be hit by
how one could survive it either way. And I feel like
I'd rather be hit by a train. Like if I'm gonna die,
if I had a
agonizing death of my throat being ripped out, or die in 1 second by being hit by a train,
I guess I'd be hit by a train. Yeah. These Saw movies make you ask these questions you never thought you'd ask yourself. You know,
right?
Tongue ripped out or hit by a train. It's like, well, these are two options. That
one of my least favorite was from Saw 5, and that is the water cube. the guy's head is
Yes,
in the cube,
yes, yes.
and it fills with water,
Which
simply
leads to
because
one of the funniest performances thereafter from that
Agent
guy.
Strom,
Oh god.
and that's the guy that ended up being crushed by the walls, by the way. But in Saw 5, he has to escape this water death. The water's going to fill this cube, which his head is in, and he ends up giving himself a tracheotomy in order to escape it, which every agent in the, they know how to do that. They know
Yeah,
the exact spot. That's the thing that I kept thinking about. Like, if I if I tried to do that, if I was like, oh man, the only way I could do this is by opening up my airway, I'd stab myself in the chin. Like, I
yeah.
would be like,
How
oh
would you
shit.
know how to
Like,
do it, where to go, and anything? Like,
I'd have made 3 or 4 different holes before I got to the right
yeah,
spot.
and you
By
would
then,
die that
the
way.
water had been filled. So,
Yeah, and you would die. It is such a
and couldn't there be some way where he could make a leak, like even a small
like
leak,
punch it into the glass, like yeah,
or
or whatever it's made
something,
out of.
like stick his hands. I don't know. That was not one of my favorite
And
ones.
does a tracheotomy even? I'm saying this word like I really know what it means. Like it's tracheotomy. Is that like it's? I'm sure it's not foolproof. I'm sure it's. I'm sure there's a very specific way to do it with medical tools. But what is this is a stupid question I guess. But what is a reason for a tracheotomy exactly? If it's like a throat cancer, if you would have, what would be the reason
Yeah,
for?
I want to say, yeah, if maybe throat cancer, or if you have some sort of maybe infection or disease, that
Okay.
affects your throat or your voice or your vocal
Okay.
cords, you would need to do that. Or if you're Kane
Or
from,
if you're the wrestler, if you're the movie star Glenn Jacobs, exactly. And then yeah, for the rest of that movie, Saw 5, the guy has to talk like this, and it's
right?
so awful. It
Yeah,
is so. Like, I remember I saw that one in theaters. People were cracking up every time he spoke because it
right.
was so ridiculous.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, because yeah, he, like, yeah.
that's pretty much
Uh,
exactly. It's like
oh, so are there any other bad ones that you can think of, Eric?
another one that I'm just trying to think of it in terms of like the logic of how you would get out of it. And I also I remember. The what it saw the final chapter, whereas the dude that it opens that guy the public execution like as everyone's watching as that big is it like the blade the boy, sorry I'm blanking on what you would call that now.
The one that
um
everybody watches is the one with the 2 guys and the girl.
Yes, yeah, and it's a giant saw
Yeah,
blade, I guess, right? Because it's like a love triangle or
right,
something like that. I think that's the connection for all of them. And
right.
yeah, everyone watching, which I remember when the trailer for that one came out because it was Saw 3D, that was like one that was like really played up. I don't know why.
Yeah,
And then when I saw it, I was like, okay, this actually, it felt like they shot it knowing it was obviously going to be 3D. And
yeah.
so watching it now, it looks really stupid.
That's my biggest no-no for 3D movies. If I can rewatch it and tell that this scene was filmed specifically for the 3D aspect, then you have failed, in my opinion. And there are a few scenes in that movie that have that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that's one that really stands out to me. It's just dumb, and there are also a lot of other ones that aren't memorable, which I feel like I don't even have passion for to like condemn them because I can't recall. There was the one with
Right.
a rapist or where he's like tied to a bed and he's got to stab out his eyes.
Yeah.
But by that point I felt like we were just running out of ways.
They were trying to be too creative in a way.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, and Jigsaw, and I just watched this movie, Jigsaw, and like most of the traps in that one are not memorable at all. The only one that just sprang into my head was the corn silo, which I don't know if it's corn. I think it's wheat. Excuse my lack of.
Just a little sharp.
But yeah, eventually things that are sharp or can kill you start pouring out of the the feeder, and so that's why they need to escape. Otherwise, they're just getting drowned in wheat or whatever
Yeah.
the feed is. But yeah, see, like that one to me had no memorable ones. At least in the ones that like Saw 4 and 5 and 6, like they tried to be creative in a really demented way. Like, but they they kind of lost their inspiration along the way. And now the person doing them is just like has a dark mind. Like, I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but the hot wax thing to me, like, or the severed spinal cord, like that one doesn't stay with you. I was telling my wife about it, and like she hates horror movies. I was just explaining it to her, and she was like, "Oh my god, please stop talking." Like,
You know what it reminded me of, which is again like something that I don't like. I just the scene I don't like think about. Do you remember the Australian Wolf Creek?
mm,
Did you see that movie from like
how
2005?
long ago? Yep.
Because he does the same thing with a knife in the back and
Oh yeah, yeah.
like even just like saying it, it's just like ugh. Um, but
Everybody
yeah,
has their triggers.
yeah, and you know what I thought I was gonna say when I was thinking of this list is in Saw 2 when they jump into the pit of needles.
That for
Uh,
some people, I know, not me personally. I mean, if
yeah,
that's how I had to save myself, it would suck, but like I would do that. Like, but some people, the idea of needles
yeah,
is a really like that is a huge fear point for them, and like I get it, um, because that some people hate them. For me personally, the one that I have the most, and I already mentioned it, really is probably claustrophobia, which the hot wax thing kind of touches on, or one of the later movies, the guy has to enter the crematorium chamber in order to get a key, and then it just catches on fire. So the idea of burning to death in like an enclosed coffin like space to me is probably one of the worst.
yeah.
That's something I wouldn't want to think about.
I would be yeah, I'd be somewhat interested if when they're writing these movies, if they kind of start with that kind of fear, what the phobia is,
Right.
or the metaphor for the crime, and then build backwards based on that, the
Right.
trap is. Uh, because yeah, some obviously, as we're discussing, seem more thought out and like entwined with the story and the metaphor of why that person's being punished. And
Right.
those are kind of cool when you could link it to the certain phobia. Like for me, it would be normally like drowning, but
Right.
the detective thing is so stupid that it can't be that.
Right.
And the pig carcass drowning is so over the top that I'm like, well, I don't think I'll ever be in that scenario. You know, I hope
Right.
not.
Yeah. You
So
kind of have to connect to it in a certain way,
absolutely, yeah,
which
and
is why like a movie like, which is off topic, but the movie Buried to me is
yeah, yeah,
one
yeah,
of the scariest movies in my opinion, just because the visual of being buried alive is just, like you were
yeah.
saying about the spine things, like it's just tough to even think about. But yeah, you kind of have to connect to it. And at a certain point in these movies, like you can't connect to it really in any way, because they become so kind of convoluted and complicated to assemble.
Yeah,
Um,
you'll never be in a genocidal merry-go-round yourself, probably.
where a
So,
shotgun goes off.
yeah, it's like, well, okay, like unless this is like, the third act of the Home Alone movies where we got a little jigsaw in training putting shotguns behind doors and flamethrowers, it's like, all right, well, I don't think I'll ever encounter any of this kind of shit, but so that yeah, then it becomes a little yeah, over the top and ridiculous, and becomes like we were mentioning off air, like the Final Destination franchise, where those are like all um about being unrealistic, I would say.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like a dark humor to that because
Oh yeah.
it's trying to spot, oh, how is this one going to die, and it's always the one thing you couldn't think of because it becomes like a comedian falling on a banana peel kind of act.
I almost
That
feel like that franchise in particular, not that we're covering that franchise, but I almost feel like that franchise didn't embrace the humor enough.
I could have done more. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
They could have embraced it a little bit more, because some of them were very funny.
yeah.
Um,
Absolutely.
but
Yeah,
yeah, in these movies, like on one hand, you kind of you look forward to, oh man, what traps are they going to have this time, what intricate ways. But at the end, you also look forward to the twist aspect of it, you know in a way, and the storytelling, which is why, if we're comparing all these different legendary horror franchises, I like the Saw franchise as a whole, simply because, right or wrongly, they do try to do things with story. They try to make them interesting in that way, but some people are really turned off by the whole phrase torture porn.
Yeah.
But
And it's just to me, I especially felt it with the last one, but I guess this is true in all of them. They're like it feels like such a cheap knock. It's such like a cheap knockoff of like Seven, in those kind of movies.
right.
Um, um, I'm sorry, I mentioned Seven in the last episode. I mentioned Usual Suspects. I'm not going to give Kevin Spacey this much attention going forward. This movie reminded me of American Beauty. No, um,
Yeah.
yeah, but just because it feels like the whole cop stuff is so Z grade Law and Order,
Yeah.
so bad that it's just
Yeah.
like, come on. Like, I think we could lean in on the fun aspect. Nobody's coming here to have the same generic detective lingo that was outdated 100 years ago. Like, it's like,
They need to go a different direction in the next one. Like,
yeah,
if it were me, I would say, all right, we've done cops to death, literally. So let's make them very much in the background
yeah,
in the 10th one, and let's just kind of go all out. But if we had an interview with like one of the screenwriters, I would ask them where the germ of the idea of a trap starts. Does it start with the intricacy of the trap itself? Does it start with the what the character did,
hmm
what crimes he committed, or what mistakes he made? Does it start there? Because that would be interesting.
yeah.
Because you know, as a fan, I think most of us just think, oh man, what would be a cruel way to die? Like,
Yeah, but I think that's why it could be cool if it's like a list of phobias and
yeah,
like picking and choosing, and then and I could imagine with Final Destination that you choose how they die and then work backwards, you
right.
know, because that's how it feels like while you're watching it. Because like, oh, he slips, but then he falls into a bus, but the bus saves him, but then a bird comes down and pecks his eyes out. And it's kind of like beat by beat by beat, like writing that out.
It'd be
Um,
crazy if the next Saw movie they go like they use Fear Factor, the show, as an inspiration. Like,
well,
like here, in order to survive, you're going to have to eat a whole bucket of bull testicles.
I mean, there were some of those. I don't know what you would call them in Fear Factor.
Stunts.
Yeah, stunts that did feel very much within that same gross out kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
And there even was one once with I don't know if it was needles specifically, but I do remember that it was something involving like maybe it was needles. I'll have to look that up. Where or it was the kind of like what's it called? The kind of worm that drinks your blood. That'll like suck on your
Leech?
face. Leech. Duh. It'll suck on your face. I mean, only if you ask it. But like, yeah. Uh, and like, it's like they had to like put all these leeches on their face and like this whole thing. And like, yeah, that feels like Saw. You know, that we're not too far away from Saw by that point.
So you heard it here first. Joe Rogan needs to be a consultant on the next Saw film.
or
So
what if he turns out to be the killer in the next Saw film? It would make sense. Like,
he's Jigsaw's son.
He's like, hey, NBC ratings are in the tank.
You thought that his son, who was apparently the miscarry in the one movie with the wife, his name was Gideon. Joe Rogan is actually Gideon. He was actually survived somehow. Like,
I mean, I do like that's another like double-edged sword I feel for this franchise. Not to go on a tangent, but this idea of like the double-edged sword of continuity. Like, this is a horror franchise that respects and sticks to its continuity, but
its own detriment sometimes.
I think totally to its detriment, but it's like one of the only horror franchises that actually sticks to continuity.
Right.
But like when like they're like, oh, in Saw 9, when they're like, well, in that scene in Saw 3, when blah 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 was that, and I'm like, what the hell? I need a map to like a glossary to know what the hell you're even referring to at this point. Who's that guy?
Person in Saw 4 farted, and as a result, they
yeah, like by the time like it's funny that we haven't even mentioned, and because it's like not even, it's crazy. How Saw starts, just two guys chained together,
right,
and a dead guy in a tub, right, or whatever. It's like, and it's so simple, and I think how crazy we've gone over the next 86 deaths.
Yeah,
we're now having deer carcass
Yeah.
shot at us.
They got to a routine where it had to be a group of people. Like they couldn't just have one trap. Which is how the series started. Like they had to have a group of people. They had to have as many as they could, almost like a comic book movie gone crazy. They had to have as many villains as they possibly could put it. But in this case, they had to have as many traps and as many people dying as they possibly could. When in reality, if I was doing a Saw 10, maybe you could just say, hey, let's maybe go back to simplistic form.
Yeah, just complete, and that's
We're
what I
not
was
going to do that. But
Yeah. I mean, if it doesn't happen when you cast Chris Rock and Samuel L. Jackson, I just don't think it'll ever happen. Like at this point, like even down to the final 3 minutes of the movie where the killer reveals his MO and that starts the Saw theme, that Charlie
Right.
Clouser Saw theme again,
Right.
and you know the exact beats and you know when that song hits that certain part, that's when you hear game over. That's when it cuts to black.
Right.
All 10 of these movies do. It's like break with the continuity for once. Like we don't need to keep doing this.
Right. I agree. Yeah, they
if
all
there's
do the
another
same thing.
yeah, if the Book of Saw has any other chapters, maybe they could change a few things. I don't know how long the Book of Saw is. What
We might
kind of book
find out.
it is. Is it a Britannica encyclopedia? What is the Book of Saw?
Since Jason X was in space, maybe this next one will be in space. Fast and the Furious is going to space. So
I mean, yeah, Leprechaun went to space, Hellraiser went to space.
it's time. Come on, we have to acknowledge right here. It's time for Saw to go to space somehow.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, why not? I mean, sure. I think it's possible. I think it's yeah, why not? It'll maybe that's one of the traps. You have to get to outer space in 60 seconds, or you die. They're
Fashion a rocket.
Yeah. You have to hit light speed within 60 seconds, but the I don't know see, I don't drive. The gasoline or whatever is inside a deer carcass that's on Pluto, but you only have 60 seconds to get it. Who the hell knows?
On Pluto.
On Pluto. How do you get to Pluto without the gasoline? Live or die. Make your choice.
I don't know if we can end on a better note than that. Pluto in space. We're giving them free ideas. So
I'll tell you.
Let us know what your favorite traps are.
Even in the outer space one, they will still find a way to connect it to those two motherfuckers in the bathroom from the first one.
Carrie Elwes will somehow have gone to space. He'll be a part of the crew.
Yeah, that's a flashback that he took a trip to outer space to set up these traps.
Yeah, that's why he wasn't in all the middle installments, because he was in space. So, all right. Well, let us know what you think of our traps that we chose, or what traps or deaths you like or remember. I keep saying like. I have a problem.
Weird way.
So, for Eric, my name is Chad. We are going to go research Pluto, and we will see you next week where we go over the franchise as a whole. Thank you very much.